That recent news from Kenya about the Jungo church closure and the discovery of bodies, it's really quite jarring, isn't it?
It absolutely is, and it throws up that really difficult question.
Yeah, where does intense, passionate faith actually tip over into something else, something potentially dangerous, maybe fanaticism?
Exactly. And look, there aren't simple answers here. That's really what we want to dig into in this deep dive.
Okay.
We're drawing on a discussion from TV 47 Kenya. It featured three people with quite different viewpoints.
Right, I saw that. There was Reverend Alan Skenga from the NCCK Nairobi,
Yes, and Boniface Yang Salala, who's a psychologist.
and Reverend Marco Kuru, another pastor. So religious leadership and psychology together.
Precisely. A really good mix of perspectives, which gives us a strong foundation to explore this.
So our goal here really is to unpack what they said, pull out those key ideas, and help you, listening, get a better handle on how to maybe tell the difference between sincere belief and, well, harmful fanaticism.
We'll be using their insights directly. Hopefully it gives you a clearer lens on this blurry line.
Okay, let's get into it. Where did these experts even start trying to draw that line?
Well, Reverend Olnaskenga brought up something important right away, the idea of false teaching.
Okay, so deviation from established doctrine.
Yes, basically. He points out that religions have core beliefs, and moving away from those is a potential warning sign. But what I found really useful was his analogy about balance.
Balance. How so?
He suggested that, too much focus just on spirituality without grounding can slide into fanaticism.
Ah, okay.
But on the other hand, focusing only on the literal text, the word,
Yeah.
can make things too rigid, kind of legalistic.
So it's about finding that sweet spot between the scripture and the lived faith.
Exactly. Guided by sort of sensible interpretation. So genuine faith, he suggests, isn't static. It's this active balancing act.
And he offered a practical test, too, didn't he? Something about actions.
Yeah, he did. He said actions need to be, well, provable or approved by Scripture. It's not just about a feeling. It needs to connect back to the teachings.
That makes sense. Did he mention specifics from the Jungo case?
He did. He pointed to things like people apparently staying in the church 204/7
Wow.
and graves inside the church building itself. Plus, this constant jumping and singing that didn't seem to have a clear basis in Scripture.
So observable things that just don't line up with typical practice.
Right. These actions become potential flags. And he also touched on something quite concerning, spiritual manipulation.
Ah, yeah. Explain that a bit more.
Well, the idea is that fanaticism can sometimes latch on to people who are vulnerable. Maybe they're desperate for healing or looking for meaning,
Then someone takes advantage of that.
potentially. Promising miracles, perhaps, but demanding total obedience, or maybe cutting people off from their families and friends to make them more dependent. It's about an abuse of influence, really.
That's worrying. And does this idea of balance come up with the other pastor, Reverend Okuru?
It absolutely does. He uses a great image. Pillars and guardrails.
Pillars and guardrails. Okay.
The pillars are like the core beliefs, the foundation.
Yeah.
But you also need guardrails, boundaries, to stop things from going off the rails into extremism.
So similar idea, different metaphor, keeps things in check.
Yeah, and he also warned about that same split. Too much focus on the rules becomes legalistic. Too much on just spiritual experience without Scripture can lead to fanaticism.
Right.
He also mentioned the book of James in the Bible, emphasizing that faith isn't just something you think or feel. It has to show up in your actions, how you live.
Which brings in ethics, I suppose.
Definitely. He made a strong point that religious practice shouldn't harm others or violate their rights, which of course circles right back to that very disturbing situation at the Jungo Church, the deceased people.
And what was his take on that specifically? He acknowledged the uncertainty.
He did. He was clear that we don't know all the circumstances.
Yeah.
But from his theological standpoint, he was very firm. A church isn't a cemetery. The idea of planning to bury people inside the church, for him, is just theologically wrong.
So that itself is a major deviation from accepted religious norms and understanding.
It's a significant one, yes. It highlights how stepping outside those established guardrails can be a serious indicator.
Okay, so we have these perspectives from the religious leaders focusing on scripture, balance, actions, norms. Let's bring in the psychologist, Boniface Yang Salala. How does he frame fanaticism?
He gives a pretty concise definition. He calls it uncritical, or an obsessive devotion towards one religion, often leading to intolerable and potentially harmful actions.
Okay, let's break that down. Uncritical devotion.
Yeah, that's key. meaning not questioning, not thinking critically about the beliefs or leadership.
Obsessive devotion.
So it consumes everything else
Intolerable.
towards anyone who doesn't share the exact same belief.
And potentially harmful action.
Right. The potential for harm, even violence, is a critical part of his psychological definition. It's interesting how uncritical echoes what the reverends were saying about needing scriptural grounding and interpretation, isn't it?
It really does, like the opposite of balanced, thoughtful faith. And Salah had an interesting idea about religion's role, too, like a mirror.
Yes, he said religion should act like a mirror. It should provide direction, strength, comfort, meaning, positive things.
A supportive force in life.
Exactly. He talks about how religion impacts our emotions, actions, relationships. So for him, the differentiator is the outcome. When those influences turn negative, lead to intolerance, isolation, harm, that's when you're moving away from healthy religion towards fanaticism.
It's about the impact then.
Very much so. The impact on the person and on others around them.
Okay, so let's try and weave these different strands together. We've got theological and psychological viewpoints. What are the big overlaps?
Well, balance is a huge one. Both the pastors and the psychologists emphasize it, just maybe using different language.
Right, theological balance versus psychological well-being, perhaps.
Sort of. And the psychologist's uncritical devotion lines up so well with the pastor's concerns about practices that, lack real scriptural basis or sound interpretation.
And the harm principle is central, too.
Absolutely. The potential for harm, which Salala highlights psychologically, connects directly to those concrete examples Reverend Alon Skenga gave from Jingo and Reverend Okuru's theological alarm bells about the burials.
It feels like when those guardrails break down, vulnerability can be exploited, leading to real danger.
That seems to be the convergence point. It really shows you need multiple lenses, theology, psychology, sociology, probably to fully grasp this. It's complicated.
Definitely. So just to quickly summarize then, we've looked at the spectrum, faith versus fanaticism. Key things seem to be balance over excess.
Avoiding rigid rules on one side and kind of anything goes spirituality on the other.
Having actions that actually align with core teachings and, basic ethics.
Crucial. Faith demonstrated, like Reverend Ukuru mentioned.
And the psychological angle flags that uncritical, obsessive element, and especially the potential for harm as signs of fanaticism.
Yeah. It makes it clear that figuring this out isn't just about judging beliefs in isolation. You have to look at the actions and the consequences.
It's definitely not simple.
Not at all. Which leaves us, and you listening, with a pretty big question to ponder, doesn't it?
Which is?
Well, how do we as individuals, as communities, actually encourage and nurture genuine, healthy faith while staying alert to the risks? How do we guard against fanaticism and these harmful practices?
What's the role of critical thinking within faith? How much questioning is healthy?
And what about community accountability? How can religious groups themselves create checks and balances to prevent things from going so wrong?
Lots to think about there. Definitely a complex challenge for individuals and communities alike.